Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to have a special guest. This is an extension of our recently released safety report, warehouse safety report, that is, of course, warehouse safety. So, we are going to talk a little bit about a technology that is filling an interesting spot within the safety realm. And I'm going to be joined by Vernon O'Donnell. He's the CEO at Voxel. And we're going to talk a little bit about their technology, how it's coming together within warehouse safety, how it's helping make sure people are more proactive about safety instead of reactive. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. And we're going to talk about the technology in general and also some of the things that they're seeing in the industry as they are working with different companies and getting their technology out there and being able to just kind of see firsthand what really are some of the issues that people are trying to solve when it comes to warehouse safety. So, Vernon, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited for the conversation today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to get you on as well, learn more about Voxel, and also just talk about this really important topic, which is warehouse safety, one that's close to my heart. I used to be in charge of a warehouse safety program in the past, so always love talking about it and seeing the different approaches that people are taking to prevention and ultimately just create awareness as well. So I want to thank you guys for being one of the sponsors of our safety report and to help us get that out there. But let's kick it off here for people that are not familiar. Give us kind of just a brief overview of Voxel and what Voxel is all about.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So Voxel is a computer vision based AI company. We're focused on, as you correctly stated, helping in safety and risk management inside of warehouses and really any sort of major supply chain hub, distribution centers, port terminals, etc. And we use computer vision to help prevent workplace incidents by identifying trends and patterns, areas of potential problems in the facility related to ergonomics or PPE compliance or vehicle safety, whole host of issues. And the way we do that is not only do we have proprietary AI and proprietary models that we've built to find all of those discrete problems, we actually tap into the existing security cameras. And so we're not a hardware company. We don't have a laborious implementation process with a lot of physical high touch. We don't require CapEx expenditures. And the great thing about that, and one of the novel things we've done, is we're very flexible to the types of cameras. We even have one customer where they're using analog video that then we're digitizing and running our models on that. So very flexible in
Analog
the type
video.
of environment.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, I was recently talking to somebody about that, an investor at a firm, and they actually asked me what analog video was. For their mid 20s, so their credit, it probably hasn't really been in use
Yeah.
in their entire life. But we know that in a lot of these warehouses, adding that sort of expense, laying new fiber, putting in new connected cameras isn't always going to be something that's critical for them. But safety is always top of mind. And so it's about how do we meet them where they are with a modern AI deep tech stack.
Interesting. Yeah. And I love that, we're seeing this technology coming into the warehouse space, especially around safety, because I think that, people, at least people that have not been in warehouses, right? I think there's not a full understanding of just how dangerous in some cases a warehouse can be. So I love to see how technology is being applied because we've seen, obviously a lot of technological advances in like our vehicles, for example, that we use every day, right? But it's great to see some of these things being brought into the warehouse environment itself to be able to help prevent that. So tell us a little bit about, because I saw on your website right away it says make safety proactive, not reactive. So tell us a little bit about what does that mean and how does that kind of tie into, I guess, the mission of what Voxel is trying to do.
Yeah, so when you think about the way people approach safety programs today, it's all well intended, but it's largely driven through observational feedback or anecdotal feedback, someone walking the floor or identifying problems, or lagging data, right? A claim was filed, an injury was reported, a recordable happened. And so you're reacting to things after they've occurred or in a limited and very kind of minimal fashion, human observation. And we've changed that entire paradigm. And so by, again, existing cameras and the ability to run these models in near real time, we're consistently interpreting and analyzing video and being able to identify, hey, there's a near miss that just occurred, or you have somebody who has a repetitive motion that's likely going to lead to a strain or musculoskeletal issue. You have a problem with no stops at this specific lane or aisle, and a variety of those sorts of things. And so we're moving away from this anecdotal, observational, reactive into proactive. And the whole concept is, how do we prevent the injury from occurring? How do we prevent the claim from being filed? How do we prevent the recordable from ever existing? And that's one of the biggest kind of mindset shifts with our customers is we're not about building a safety program based off of your 6-month loss run analysis. We're about, hey, over the last week, we've seen a spike in no stops in this part of your warehouse. Is it because you changed your operational flow? Is it because you had to expedite a bunch of inventory to meet a customer delivery or contractual requirement? And how do we actually balance that with the need for safety in a way that isn't going to be cost prohibitive to a business?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I love that because I think that is oftentimes the case, right? People are like, oh, I don't need to do anything about my safety, or they're just not thinking about it until like all of a sudden, like, oh my God, a forklift just hit the rack
Yeah.
and somebody got hurt. Right now, it's like, oh, what do we do? How do we, fix this and all these things, which is not the right mindset to have, right? I mean, you don't want that to happen in the first place. So I love that you said that you're looking at it and we're not coming in, like you said, and going to look at the last 6 months to see, okay, well, what has happened, and let's do something about that. Like we're ongoing trying to make sure the future is safer within your operation, basically, right? So very interesting there. So I'm curious, as you're been going into these operations and you start applying the technology, which we'll talk a little bit about how that works here in a second. But I'm curious, what are you seeing are some of kind of the most common safety occurrences that are happening in these operations? Like, what is your technology calling out like almost immediately?
Yeah, and I think the just to kind of orient the listener, we break it
Mhm.
up into really three groupings. So you have workers, you have vehicles, and then you kind of have areas or environments,
Mm.
right? And so from a worker perspective, we're helping to identify ergonomic risks, improper lifting techniques, overreaching, unsafe material handling, and not just is there an overreaching problem or an improper bending problem, but the frequency and severity of it, but also like really triangulating when and where. Second shift
Mm.
at this dock in the fresh section, for instance. PPE compliance, making sure people are wearing their hard hats and gloves and safety vests, and not just are they wearing them when and where they're supposed to be wearing them. Again, that context, it matters so much. And then so that's kind of how we think about the worker from a vehicle perspective. And those are the most common, right? Ergonomics issues are definitely the most common. They're the most common workman's comp claim. They're the most common workplace injury. To your earlier point, I think a lot of folks have not spent time in warehouses or in industrial environments. I certainly have,
Mm.
both as a young man, but even now on the tech side of things. And as you look at aging family members growing up in the Midwest in kind of industrial environments, they all have bad backs and bad shoulders and bad knees. It's like, how do you prevent that 20
Yeah.
years down the road, right? You can't, once you have arthritis, it's too late. It's how do you stop it when they're 19? So that's the most common.
Mm.
The second biggest area is vehicle, right? And speeding obviously is a big issue. You'd be shocked at how often we help customers identify the fact that somebody's changed the governors on their forklifts and they're whipping around at 9 mph versus 6. So
9,
they,
wow,
even though they think
that.
the
Yeah.
governor's on, it's frequent that we find that's not the case. Near
Mm.
misses, and the reason we're really focused on near misses is not only is that a recordable from an OSHA perspective, it's a really strong leading indicator of a potential, really catastrophic thing to happen, right? If we see, and we do see this, a high propensity for a near miss at a specific turn, and so often it's because maybe the stop sign's obstructed, or the pallets are stacked too high, or they're leaning over, or the pedestrian walkway isn't clearly demarcated. And so that's just a catastrophic waiting to happen, right? But we're seeing
Mm.
that in real time, ubiquitously, and helping to kind of intervene to prevent that from ever reaching that point. Um, and then, from an environmental perspective, no pedestrian zones or people where, when, and how they're supposed to be there. Are emergency exits blocked or obstructed, or eye washes blocked or obstructed? Not only is that a safety issue, it's something where if OSHA does come in, you're going to get dinged with a pretty hefty fine. And so really those are the most common ways we're interacting with customers, is preventing those musculoskeletal issues, preventing vehicle safety issues, and then helping them manage the environment in a more effective fashion.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a great way to break it down, and that's a lot of like detail too. You mentioned there the technology picking up on whether or not the person is wearing the proper PPE, right, like gloves or something like that, and in the right location too,
Yeah.
which I think is pretty significant. And it reminds me, I used to work with this guy, and he was this older guy, had been around for a long time in the industry, super focused on safety, and he would just like scan the cameras himself like relentlessly. And I remember one time specifically he sent like a screenshot like, oh, employee not wearing gloves while handling a pallet. And I'm just like, oh my god, like how did how did you even see that? Like it's so pinpointed, but I love that it's technology that can give you like that extra set of eyes to be able to see those things and call those out, because the normal manager or supervisor is not going to be have the time to really comb through and look at those things that intensely. So that's really interesting. But I'm curious. You mentioned there that you spent some time in the warehouse, and I think you joined Voxel. I saw within the last year or so, right?
Yeah.
As CEO. So I'm curious, drawing from that experience inside the warehouse. I mean, what really attracted you to Voxel and kind of the approach to safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of the answer is personal more than professional.
Hmm.
I'll answer the professional part first, because it's Voxel's a really neat culmination of my career. So when I moved into,
Mm.
so I started my career at Grainger Industrial Supplies. So you're familiar with Grainger and kind of
Sure.
what they do.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's where, fresh out of grad school, spent a ton of time in the DCs and in the branches, and a big Grainger branch effectively is a warehouse, right?
Mhm.
They're pretty significant, and a heavy amount of stock there on hand. Um, but when I moved into software, it was actually in computer vision. So I've got a background in computer vision and applied AI. Was in sports tech, so different sort of human performance and body
Right.
analysis. More for high performance athletes in soccer and in the NBA and other major professional sports organizations around the world. And then I moved into supply chain technology from there and did a bunch of work in the supply chain tech space. And so I've got a background in supply chain tech. I've got a background in computer vision. I started my career at Grainger. So professionally, this is like a really neat kind of intersection of those three things. And then from a personal standpoint, um, grew up in Indiana. Well, kind of
Mm.
first person in my family to have like a real kind of office job. Grandfather was an electrical worker. Uncle worked as a butcher. My cousins worked on farms and in warehousing and in manufacturing. So that's been kind of the family I grew up with and around. And so one of my cousins had a pretty significant workplace injury that I would argue is preventable, right?
Mm.
In the way it happened, and he spent a long time in a hospital after that, and then years in kind of an elongated process recovering and getting back to a
Oh
point where
wow.
he could really be productive again. And so when you so often, and sorry, I know I'm on a soapbox here for a second, but so often I think people forget it's not just about the injury in the moment. If you're the actual person who suffers that, it's all of the elongated effects of getting
Mm.
back to being able to return to work, being able to return to your livelihood. It's a significantly underinvested and underfocused on space, in my opinion. I think a lot of folks are using AI for knowledge workers and high tech workers, and they're very focused on in education and that sort of outcome. And I think being able to apply AI to someone who's on the warehouse floor, and not in a way that's a surveillance product, and not in a way that's an
Mm.
automation product, but in a way that's an actually enrichment product, which is really passion. Like it was a big passion point for me. So that was kind of what brought me here professionally, personally. It almost felt too good to be true. And 14 months, yeah, into the job, and it's still feels that way in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I'm sorry to hear that about your family member, but I
He's
think
great
it's so
now. He's
great.
great now. So it's all
Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah.
15 years later in a great spot. But definitely was not a God, maybe even 20 years ago. But
Yeah.
It all ends up in the right space, the right place at the end.
Yeah, yeah, and that's good, but I mean, it's a great example though, like you said, it's not just about the injury happening in the moment, right? It's all the things after, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's, depending on the injury or the accident, whatever happens, I mean, you're out of work, you can't, do the things you wanted to do with your family and, live a normal life sometimes, right? You have to go through therapy and all these different things. It disrupts what, you expect life to look like, right, for a while. So it's super important to be able to focus on and have that preventative measure. I mean, even just from, those over time, like you mentioned, those kind of musculoskeletal stuff that goes on and the arthritis, it's, okay, you're working all day and it shouldn't be you come home and you're so sore that you just can't do anything, right? You can't play with your kids or you don't even feel like going out. You just
Yeah.
want to crash on the couch, right? I mean, that's no way for anybody to, I think, go about their lives, right? So being able to prevent that, I think, is a great thing. So tell us a little bit about the technology itself. You mentioned that it's using computer vision, goes into existing cameras, all different types, including analog, which you mentioned, which is an
We
interesting
try to
fact there.
avoid that.
Yeah,
Please,
I'm sure.
that's
Yeah,
not the primary, but yes, it's
yeah.
a possibility.
I'm sure. I'm sure, and hopefully we don't have people wanting to switch back from digital to analog.
No,
So
we're not seeing anybody go backwards. Luckily, yeah,
definitely,
good. Yeah,
definitely, yeah, yeah. So tell us a little bit about the technology itself, right? Like if I'm a warehouse manager and maybe just regular manager, or maybe I have some responsibility over safety. I mean, I think all managers have some responsibility, but if I'm not dedicated to safety, like what does the technology look like? How do I work with it? How does it come into the operational fold?
yeah. So I'll answer this in two parts. And the first part we don't have to get too far into is this is the how, right? And so we've
Yeah.
got the proprietary AI models we built. They're kind of a really novel approach where there's discrete models focused on specific problems like overreaching and proper bending, and then larger models that are focused on kind of like foundational elements like warehouses and industrial environments. But the way it actually plays out for an end user, which is the important part, we actually have a few full-time certified safety professionals that we've actually hired into our business.
Okay.
They're part of helping to shape the product and the product experience because it's not just enough to identify all these problems and see all these incidents. It's what do you actually do thereafter? And so there's a application that the customers interact with. It helps them collaborate on problems, but when they log in, it's identifying, hey, if you're focused on vehicle safety or you have a high rate of this type of injury, we've focused the product into those experiences. Then there's a whole workflow for them to be able to collaborate, share, and interact with those specific problem areas. They can track actions done. Um, and so we really view it as like, how do you take the computer vision and then equip not a full-time certified safety professional, but an actual shift supervisor to log in. And this is another thing that's important. I think our goal is not to be this first screen experience where they're in Voxel for hours a day. In fact, that's like a
Mm.
fundamental misunderstanding of a warehouse worker. Our goal should be a shift supervisor comes in 30 minutes before their shift starts. They spend 5 minutes in Voxel and they know the problems that happened yesterday. We're helping them that. We're taking them right to it. They know exactly what things they need to coach their team on. And in fact, we're even giving recommendations for their daily safety stand up. Like, here are the problems that you should be looking at as you start your shift. And then kind of putting all that into a highly responsive, mobile responsive application. So hopefully it kind of paints the picture of like the
Yeah.
computer vision is how, but everything that's important is what. And it comes from having people who've actually worked in warehouses. One of our earliest employees was a general manager of an Americold facility. One of our other
Oh, okay.
earliest employees was an ergonomist who came out of an operational environment. Another came, as a key person who did this from an insurance perspective. It's not just enough to have great technical workers. We got to have the great subject matter experts to balance that out.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's great too. I mean, I love that you're getting employees that have the experience on the floor, right? Because I think sometimes we see technologies come into our space, and they think they're solving this problem, but they don't really ask many people, if any people, that have been on the floor, right, about it, and they kind of miss it a little bit. So, but I think that's really awesome that you come in as a shift supervisor, ops manager. You look at this and you understand, and I love that it's giving recommendations for the stand up as well too, just to be able to share with the employees and create that awareness. So I'm curious. I mean, how quickly do you see a shift in the safety culture when you implement Voxel?
We start to see impact in like 1 to 2 weeks, right? Like
Mm,
really, really quickly, from a sight unseen to being able to see something perspective. Like I'll use an example. We had a large grocer customer. Once they turned it on, I mentioned earlier the governor problem. They had over 2,000 incidents of vehicle speeding right away on day one. So we actually were like, oh my god, our algorithm's
wow.
wrong. We mismapped this environment, and then we
Yeah.
did a bunch of validation. We came back the next day. We're like, no, no, you have a real speeding problem. And then they
Mm,
looked into it, and there was some sort of glitch in the system to where people could just kind of whip around the warehouse at 50% higher speeds than what their speed limit was. So
mm,
that's one where it's like 2 days in, there's an immediate and tangible impact. Typically, though, we usually wait about 6 to 8 weeks before we start looking for some material change in trend, because you have to get the data, help people orient themselves from a contextual perspective. Once they've had that orientation, start to actually help them through some recommendations and then start to see output. But we usually, within about 90, by our first 90-day QBR, we've got some really strong wins to point to. And then within 6 months, we start to see actual ROI, reduction in
mm.
claims, reduction in OSHA fines, and being able to tabulate that and show not just are you safer, but are you actually justifying this from a business cost perspective as well?
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I love that example too. And I think that's like, I mean, that's pretty wild. You must have been
Yes,
something,
we've seen
something
some
crazy.
wild ones too. There's
Yeah.
some other ones too. You see some things where you're like, why is there an overreaching problem in that part of the warehouse? And then you see a guy who's like made a makeshift fort he's standing on, and the guy's like pushing pallets underneath the racking because they don't want to have to go down. And you're like, okay, so the good news is we
Yeah.
identified the ergonomics problem. The bigger problem is what in the heck is happening on your overnight shift
Yeah.
that you even create this environment. So
Yeah.
yeah, you do see some pretty jarring things.
Interesting, interesting. I'm sure, and I mean, I've seen some things in my experience too, but I can only imagine the more things that you pick up when you have these kind of the cameras watching and being able to identify and call out these things. So now tell us a little bit about you. Kind of touched on it briefly there at the end of the last answer, but oftentimes from a safety perspective, people are not necessarily thinking about I guess allocating budget, right? Or spending money on some type of safety initiative or things like that until it's too late, right? Until something else has happened and then they're like, "Oh my god, we need to do something about this." But for you, I mean, you guys are really focused on the proactive, preventative as we talked about. So how do you kind of approach someone who's like we haven't really had many incidents, not sure if it's worth it to spend the money on some technology around safety. How do you approach that and how do you kind of I guess break down that barrier which in my opinion shouldn't be there, right? I mean, I think they should be striving to be as safe as possible, and if they can leverage technology, I think that's an awesome thing to do. But obviously people don't think the same way. So how do you kind of knock down that barrier of thinking and change the mindset a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question. And it's one that keeps me up every day, right? Because the tech
Mm,
works, the values there, and so how do you kind of continuously get the not just the buyer but the user to really believe and adopt? And so we tend to see a couple of things really resonate. So there's a bit of a barbell effect right off the
mm,
bats where you have customers that have high recordables, high OSHA, high claims, and they have a strong need signal. And so then it's really for them, hey, you have a pain point, you have a problem, you're dealing with something that high number of recordables or higher injury rate. We can help you immediately start to drive that down, and then at that point in time, the cost is kind of tertiary to our ability to have an impact. On the
Mm,
other end, you actually see a lot of customers, and I was pleasantly surprised. They're spending money and putting effort into safety. Like it's kind of and they have a low rate of incidents and a low recordables and low injury rates, but it's because the safety culture matters to them, and they put a lot of effort and a lot of intention in that and a lot of investment. And you can see them that they're exploring. Right, we've had a lot of people they've purchased wearables in the past or
mm,
other forms of IoT. And so they're trying things, but they're not getting the results they would want or expect from those sorts of applications. And I can get into all the challenges that wearables have and having sustained impact. Um, but that buyer's also bought in, right? So we have those two, they're bought in. They have budget, they have intent, they have pain, they have problems. It's that middle where it's like, oh, we've got a good safety record, we're fine, and tech is expensive. What do we do? And for them, it's really a matter of a couple of things. Even if they have a great safety culture and a great safety record, there's a high amount of employee turnover, right? And a lot of these warehouses,
mm.
I don't have to. I'm sure you have done many podcasts on employee retention, employee
We talk about it all the
all
time.
the time, all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like you're always kind of in this just-in-time moment where you don't have a systematic approach because your turnover is 40%, 50%. I
Mm.
mean, we talked to one customer, their turnover was 110% annualized,
Wow.
which is wild to me. And so it's kind of helping them understand you've got this heavy turnover workforce, you have a constrained labor market, and then you have significant exposure to risk if something major was to happen. And the beautiful thing, and this is where we kind of took a novel approach, we partner with a lot of the insurance carriers and a lot of the insurance
Mm,
brokers. And in those scenarios, they come in and they talk about it less around, hey, you have a high claims rate, and more, we've seen this impact. And so in the future, if your claims continue to go down and you're using Voxel, you'll be able to save money on the back end as well. And so that's been another way
wow.
we've really been able to like, hey, don't believe us. Talk to the actual people who are the true actuaries and accountants for how this plays out, and understanding the impact that's going to have in your environment, particularly as you think about the fact that you're managing a transient work environment, not transient, but high turnover workforce.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, interesting, and I think that's a great point too about the insurance as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sure like CFO is gonna like that for sure, right? That we can save our insurance
Mm-hmm.
costs at some point, right? But I think it's an interesting approach, and it's interesting to see I guess different positions that people are in, as you mentioned, and you mentioned there that some people have invested in some type of wearables, but that's not necessarily as viable as you think it could be. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there's a few challenges. So let me start with the positives of computer vision, right? So
Sure.
computer vision, it's ubiquitous, right? It's always on. And I want to caveat that by saying we're not Big Brother, so we have facial blurring,
Mhm.
body blurring. The intent is not to be a gotcha, right? But the intent is to be holistic. And so you're
Mm,
not just seeing or understanding specific individuals and their relationship, you're understanding the entire environment and how the people interact with each other and with the environment. And so that's a big difference between a wearable where you're kind of isolated to a specific individual, specific body, what they're
mm,
doing. And sure, they can be highly accurate, for ergonomics risk, but you're not going to capture the PP compliance. You're not going to capture the vehicle interactions. You're not going to capture a variety, how they're working around impediments, or maybe the overreaching is due to the fact there's a lot of obstructions on the ground. So there's that contextual piece of this. And again, you're a warehouse expert. You have like these are such connected environments in terms of individual worker risk is usually so closely associated with operational risk, right? Are you expediting an order? Do you have a messy dock because something came in at the out and people are working around that, and then they're starting to accelerate or move too fast or drive too fast to catch up, and that's when risk happens. And so I think that's the fundamental existential advantage that computer vision has is that kind of all seeing, all knowing understanding. And then the
mm,
other problem with wearables, it goes back to the last point, you have a high turnover workforce, right? And so you've got wearables are expensive to maintain. You have kind of people
mm,
constantly breaking. You're then in a whole different thing where you're talking. We don't identify individual labor. If you're a union facility, a wearable, you know exactly who's doing what, right? We try to
mm,
protect the anonymity of the worker, and so it's a more worker friendly approach. And at the same time, you don't have all the loss of people turning over and leaving with their
mm,
devices, throwing their devices away, breaking their devices. Once the camera is set up and running, the models are live in 3 to 5 days. And at that point in time, the opposite flywheel happens. The product gets better and better and better, right, as it goes, versus you having increasing risk of like the loss of the actual physical device.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really great point about the kind of the life of the wearable in a sense, right? Does it get damaged? Does somebody take it home by accident and then they don't return? Things like that. I mean, I remember, have a hard enough time making sure all our RF scanners are just there, like let alone another piece of equipment, right? To
Yep.
tie to every employee. So it's very interesting points there. And now obviously, applying computer vision and this technology to safety is certainly creating some of the future of what warehouse safety looks like. But I'm curious, what do you think warehouse safety looks like in the next few years as we see more technology come in, whether it's safety focused or it's robotics or automation and things like that? I mean, what does the safety landscape look like in the next few years?
I think, and look, I'd love to. Yeah, I think what the Voxels of the world are doing is what safety is going to look like in the future. I think the days of clipboards and kind
Mm,
of walkabouts through the facility and relying on claims data are going to be gone in 3 years. And companies that are taking this sort of very anecdotal, antiquated approach, either because they're AI resistant or because they're change resistant, are going to be so far behind their competitors. And I mean competitors here as in competitors in the warehouse space for labor, right? If I'm a worker and then here's the beautiful thing, we can save them cost. Like one of our major customers, we're having a material impact on their cost per case,
mm,
which means they can start to increase salary for employees and become more competitive from a worker perspective because they're spending less on loss. So it's more take home pay for the worker, less loss for the business. You're retaining more talented folks. And I think that's the future where this is going. Is it's you have to manage it in real time. You have to manage it proactively. You have to use technology in a way that is non-invasive and is worker friendly, right? Because the whole point here is you can retain that trained workforce. So I think I
mm,
believe fully that's the future of where this is going. And I think the days of a compliance driven approach to safety, which look, I'm not trying to besmirch any sort of compliance. I think that's a great forcing function. It's a great way to manage this. But the days of letting compliance drive your safety outcomes is a backwards way of thinking about it. It's a business differentiator, either in terms of cost reduction or productivity acceleration, and you got to lean into that.
mm, mm. Interesting, interesting. And I love that, you're saying that you could not only make the workers safer, but also potentially give them more money, which I think
Yep.
is like a win-win all around for that workforce, and certainly would help bring you down potentially from 110% turnover. I would hope, right?
Yeah, that customer is
So
now a lot down from that. That was kind of
yeah,
the peak,
yeah,
but
yeah,
you see some wild turnovers out there. I mean, they're especially like
it's
really.
crazy.
I live
Yeah,
in Chicago. Like if you go down to the
yeah,
southwest side of Chicago, like there's a major warehouse corridor down there. It is competitive for talent down
oh
kind
yeah.
of on that 55 stretch of I-55. I mean, it's tough. So you got to find a way to differentiate to keep talent.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, 50 cents an hour makes a huge difference.
Huge
And
difference. Yep.
yeah, in these warehouse pockets. I'm here in like central New Jersey, and it's the same kind of thing, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's pretty wild. Yeah. So really interesting talking to you, Vernon, and learning more about Voxel and also some of the things that are going on with warehouse safety out there. So we gotta close it out here with your number one top warehouse safety tip. What would
Oh,
you say?
a number one tip. Uh,
Mm.
That's honestly, Kevin, I've not ever been asked that question, which is as many of these I've done and discussions, I've never actually been asked my number one tip. Um, I would say my number one tip, and I'm not an expert, so I'll caveat that by saying that.
Okay.
Uh, I think it is really understanding forklift to pedestrian interactions in high traffic areas, like really really digging into that, because that's where we see not just those catastrophics but all sorts of residual issues that kind of manifest from that. So I think my number one focus area is like any high traffic areas where forklifts and pedestrians are crossing over one another. have you really done the diligence to make sure you have the right level of demarcation, high visibility stop signs? Are you stacking pallets the right way? Like all of that intersection ecosystem is an area where people need to be even more diligent and attentive than they are right now.
All right, fantastic tip. That's one of my favorites, actually. I will say. I just shared that tip for National Forklift Safety
Oh, awesome. Great.
earlier this week.
I didn't pull that from yours, but I'm glad that we're on the same page here.
Definitely, yeah, yeah. I think that's a great one for sure. So really appreciate you joining me here on the show, Vernon. And if people want to learn more about Voxel, where should they go? Where should they reach out?
Easy thing is just go to the website www.voxelai.com. And then, anybody wants to ask me a question, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. There's, I think, literally one living Vernon O'Donnell. so drop me a note on LinkedIn or hit us up on the website.
All right, fantastic. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes. And make sure that you check out that warehouse safety report, which you can also find at thenewwarehouse.com and linked in the show notes here as well. So, Vernon, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
Appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.